Okay.
Listen to the song first.
For those of you who don't know, Young Sun is my wife as well.
She's our cinematographer and your wife.
Yeah, she does all the cinematography on my films and is also the co-producer of my film, Words from a Bear, that we just screened last night. And I thought it was an amazing screening. There's a lot of people there. So, you know, a lot of times when I think about going to screenings or anything that deals with my work, and I guess that's for any artist, but especially filmmakers that rely on audience participation to really have something to talk about at the end of the film, you're always worried that there's going to be like maybe 2 people there or 3 people. And I don't know, it never matters, when or where the screening happens. I'm always surprised how many people show and want to talk about the film, but also the Q&A last night went into a lot of different areas, and a lot of the question and answer sessions that I've had over the last year have deepened, I think, in terms of thinking about, in particular, oral narratives or orality in Indigenous cultures and how we extend that into a space where we're protecting those stories, regenerating those stories, in some way revitalizing language. The way that I always think about my filmmaking, and I think a lot of Indigenous filmmakers, the way that they feel about their filmmaking, is that there's more to this than just the value of making a film and that it earns some cash at the box office or that they develop an audience, that there's something incredibly important about the work that we're doing. We're extending or trying to think of ways of extending these narratives to future generations, and we're holding on to things or trying to hold on to things. And I think that that's what our job is in creating that impact. Not to mention the political side of it, which I tend to, it's an interesting space. Last night, one of the things that a lot of people wanted to talk about in terms of N. Scott Momaday was what his politics are. And he, in the film, consciously avoids this idea of political affiliation. Although, when you watch the film, there's an interesting paradox going on there in terms of his identity, one, but also this underlying political sort of statement that he tends to be making throughout the film, but at the same time claiming that he's not a political person. And I got the same question last night about the politics of my film, Words from a Bear. And it's interesting because I think a lot of times Native people get placed into this spectrum of wanting to be attached to a quote-unquote political agenda. And I always find it hard in terms of taking on that responsibility, considering all the responsibilities and all the things that we have to deal with as Indigenous people on a daily basis within our own tribal groups, let alone extending out into the world. But I do think it's important, and it's time that these things do reach across those spaces and that there are connections being made, specifically in the area of climate change. And I think that that's one of the real political statements that I make towards the end of the film in Words from a Bear is the type of political actions that were happening in the last couple of years while I was making the film, which included Standing Rock. And I wanted to present that in a way that was talking about being caretakers for the planet. But ultimately, what my films try to do is create learning experiences for non-native people, but at the same time, taking care of language, taking care of these oral narratives, and trying to preserve them in some way. And the only way that I know that I can do that is through cinema. That's what I feel I'm best at. You know, there's, I think in my life, just to give you a history of who I am and what my background is I received my Bachelor of Arts from the University of Oklahoma in anthropology. And I don't really know why I decided to do anthropology other than the fact that my dad was a linguistic anthropologist at the university, and I was very interested in following in his footsteps. And I think that one of the things that Dad did, not only within linguistic anthropology, he brought the Kiowa language to the university and also began a program that brought several other languages. I don't know how many ended up being in the program. Five of them. So much in a similar way to what's happening here, which is so great that the Cayuga language is here, and that we're beginning on that journey so that hopefully we will have more languages in the future, because really that's the essence, I feel like, of everything. There's so much power to our languages, and they're disappearing. And I think at that particular time in the 90s when my father started that program, it was just highly influential to me. But I wasn't in it. I really wasn't interested in linguistics. You know, I didn't really want to look at linguistic work from that perspective. And once I started going down that path of linguistic anthropology, it became dull to me, and I switched towards ethnographic filmmaking. And at that time, it was just kind of beginning at the University of Oklahoma, people bringing in films. And what I saw within that type of filmmaking was a lot of exploitation. They were mainly non-Indigenous people filming these people as subjects. And the first film that I saw that really highly influenced me in this canon of films, which were hundreds of films by ethnographic filmmakers that really, none of them were done by Indigenous people. I saw a Victor Mesayevsa Jr. film, who's a Hopi filmmaker. And it really changed my life, because for the first time I realized that we could utilize language, that we could be inside our own culture and film our own culture and still be objective and still hold on to stories. And so his work really influenced me highly, and that it was a possibility. That was like 1998, you know? And I went through so many other programs and degrees, and you know, I got a Master of Arts in Native American Studies from OU, and I entered into a PhD program in history, and was a year in, and I really wanted to make a film as part of my dissertation in history, and that's just a big no-no. They wanted a book. And not to mention the fact that I was literally, well, there were probably 2 or 3 of us in the program that were Native that wanted to do Native American history. And we were kind of the token Indians in this program, and we were getting literally pulled in all directions by people that were pre-Civil War and post-Civil War and 20th century historians that all felt like we needed to be in those spaces. So it was a really contentious program in that sense. And the way that we wrote and the way that we wanted to tell our stories was not in the style or the correct way to present history. And oral narratives were a really big problem in this history program in terms of how you utilize oral history, and that these particular written documents or the primary sources were not going to be within some of the things that we wanted to tell. And that was also a big no-no in this particular program. And this is at the University of Oklahoma, which has a Western history background, right? So after that year, and then there was also law school somewhere in there, I ended up deciding that I wanted to make films because I felt like as an artist, I could have the freedom to be able to move within these spaces. I still utilize a lot of the training that I have from anthropology and from history. And so those things come into play. When you see Words from a Bear, you realize that there's 3 layers to it. There's the ancient layer, which deals with orality. There's the historical layer, which really is looking at the primary documentation. And then there's the testimonial, which is the present and the future. And so I try to work within all of those mediums within my filmmaking because, again, I believe that all of these things that we do when we do tell stories, especially Indigenous stories, have to be there. And it's integral to what I think is important about Indigenous storytelling. The other layer that's in there is also language. Unfortunately, Words from a Bear is a PBS production, so I couldn't do the whole thing in Kiowa. Although if I had that choice, I would have at least had a half and half between English and Kiowa within the film because we could tell those stories in Kiowa. Scott isn't a fluent speaker in Kiowa, but my father is, who was an important aspect to the filmmaking process for Words from a Bear. And we did get a little bit in. You know, there is some Kiowa language in there. But again, once you do cross over into this space where you are making a public documentary, which is really what it is because it's all taxpayers' money that's, making this documentary possible, we had to make that type of concession. So what I want to show you guys just first is a short film that really, truly, I think, holds all of these elements. And I'm going to pull it up here. I'm sorry that it's jumping around here. This is a film called Origins. And this film is certainly did not premiere at the Sundance Film Festival. It isn't going to have a national broadcast, but it really is one of the most important films that I've made because it really defines, I think, who I am as a filmmaker and, again, what I feel strongly in the work that I've seen across the world in terms of Indigenous cultures has these elements of the ancient, the historical, and the testimonial, and that it fits within that framework. And then, of course, language is enveloped around that. So let's just watch a little bit. I don't want to spend, it's a 20-minute film, so I don't want to take up my whole time doing that, but I want to show you a little bit so that you get an understanding of what this is. Can we bring down the lights?
Switch over there.
Okay, thank you. All right, I appreciate that. Oh, thank you so much. My voice is cracking.
Cool. They own day and bone. On day and day the ain't they key. Habe get domeno. Toga. Oga get o day. O dom get mon get dome day. Bohe Gadome Oyo Go Ogo Ongo Adome Deazel Behel Habe Go Diabum Dehel No Italy Angel Tom Habe Angel Rondemon Anton Hel Oko Tom Habe Non-doma Ondi Dotone Honde No de Tali Egoe Copeai Enta El No Ogoton Hobe Piano Batali Egoe Piai Gun Tonga Sende on here. No, enko. Onde don here no. Do don get. So ik algo top don no. Onde get on don no eko. En so go. Enko today tired do de eko. Ba on go eko. En tail do beb no. Atel Gayogohó Dome no pan Cayuga bai de ego Cayuga no oyo de pedo ego Gayogohó asote ahi mo so Gayogohó do ego colleague Gedode.
Grandfather, I often hear you in my dreams. You are with me every day. There are special days that I climb to the tops of the Wichita Peaks and gaze across the mountain range, thinking of you and making prayers for our people. On clear days, I can see Mount Scott in the distance, and I imagine buffalo roaming in the valleys below. Things have changed so much, Grandfather.
Okay. So this is, again, and really what I wanted to achieve in this film. I never knew my great grandfather, Henry Tenedaw, and I bear his name. I don't put, this is something that I should do, but when I was younger, in the first, second, and third grade, I used to tell the students in my class that my last name was Tenedaw, and they transformed it into Tenedog, and it was a horrible experience dealing with, and if you were Native and you lived in Carnegie, Oklahoma, it's an incredibly racist place, and so I took that name away from me, and I always think in my mind that I want to bring it back in what I'm doing as a filmmaker and a director and have that name up there because it's very, very important. But I never knew Henry. He died before I was born, and he was my father's grandfather. But I think he was very, very important in who I am as a person and my identity. And I wanted to have a conversation with him. And so that's what Origins is about. The story is about a conversation with my great-grandfather. And through the magic of cinema, I can do that. I can have that conversation. And I really feel in my mind that these are the things that he would have told me. These are the stories that he would have told me at night if I had the ability to be with him. And so that's what this whole film is about, is the conversation between the two of us. He's telling me about the things that have happened, and I'm telling him about the way things are now. And if you continue to watch the film, and I'll give a link to you guys so that you can have access to it, because I would love for you to see the whole film. We go deep into historical topics, and we talk about Kiowa identity, and we talk about a multitude of things. We even talk about something that's very taboo, I think, for Kiowa people to talk about, which is Cutthroat Gap, in which a party of Osage decapitated about 1,000 Kiowa people and put their heads in containers, metal containers that the Army supplied to them. In our history, it's really literally the darkest moment. And we have that conversation. And so the film is not without controversy, which I think my films are, because I am going into spaces that I think you have to have a lot of reverence for, especially when you're talking about origin stories, especially when you're talking about events in history that are catastrophic. But I've made that choice to take on that burden as a filmmaker, because again, I think it's important to preserve those things. And so the very first story that you guys heard is our origin story, is Kiowa origin stories. We came, in fact, out of a cottonwood tree. And we're a very small tribe. We usually make our comparisons to the Comanche. We don't get along with Comanches, even though we have lived within their space for thousands of years. But in our story, were these ants coming out of a tree in this log, and Sane Day is our trickster hero. And Sane Day is a magical person who can do many things. We don't know if he's male or female. He really is androgynous in some sense. And he or she, I should just say Sane Day, brought us the sun. Sane Day created morality for us. And he also brought us out of this log, this hollow log. And the interesting story there is a pregnant woman plugged the hole. And that's one of the reasons why we're such a small tribe, is because only a few of us could get out. And so that's the origin story. And we think it took place somewhere far in the north, where all of this transpired. Kiowa people are mysterious in the sense that we have a Tanoan language. We use a Tanoan dialect, which is Pueblo. So we're very closely linked to Pueblo people, but we also are Plains Indians. We don't live in Pueblos. We're nomadic travelers. And a lot of our stories are connected to the north. So we have a story of the Seven Sisters, which is connected to Devil's Tower, Wyoming. But the Lakota, the Dakota, and the Crow, and many other tribes, the Cheyenne, all have stories that are related to that space as well. Ours is a little bit different in the way that we look at it. We call Devil's Tower Tsowai, and Tsowai means rock tree. So we think about Devil's Tower as a tree stump. And when you go out there, actually the first time it's in this film, but it's also in Words from a Bear. It's an incredibly powerful place, and the only thing that I can imagine it is a tree stump. I can't see it any other way. It's green. It's bizarre looking. It has knots in it like it has roots. It's an amazing feature. And when I talked to the National Park Service about it, they couldn't tell me what it was. They have no idea how it's there. And so I told them the story and said, that's the best that I can say that it is that it is a tree stump and that the story is true. So again, our transition from that space back down to Oklahoma is an interesting travel and journey, and there's lots of stories that are connected to that. And when we go back to Taos Pueblo and we go back to places like that, a lot of times Taos Pueblo people say that you're really a Pueblo and that at some point in history you were the hunters. And as the hunters, you took journeys, and then one journey you just never came back. And that was an interesting oral history that I got, that we never really put this down, did we, Dad? We never really wrote about this, or
about the connection.
Yeah, about that connection. But it was an interesting story to me, because I thought, wow, this is something that in our tribal history was probably there, but was lost somewhere down the line. But it came back to us, and I want to tell that story at some point and talk about that. And hopefully I'll have the opportunity to do that. So
We have some imagery and symbols that are typically Southwestern. For example, the spiders, the spider woman. At some point there's even maize or corn grown, so it kind of connects us to that agricultural period. Perhaps, who knows how many thousands of years, languages acquire, they accrue from others, and they expand. And it's like English, English is pretty well mixed with all kinds of other languages. We steal things, in other words, and they help us apparently.
So is there any questions just before I flip to Words from a Bear, because I also want to give you an example of that, but please.
I thought it was fascinating yesterday how you did talk about that lack of reception of Origins when you released it originally, but I was wondering, how long ago was that? That's quite, like 10 years at least now?
Between that film and this?
Yeah.
That film, I think I finished in 2012, so yeah, it's been close to 10 years. Yeah.
I mean, I guess I'll put it out there just as a question for us to think about. Has the environment for the reception of bilingual stories like this changed in the past 10 years, where if you...
Yeah. I don't know. Let me put it this way. Origins would be the story I would want to tell. Like, if PBS had given me the infinite amount of funds that they gave me to make this film, that would have been the film that I could best tell Scott's story through, right? And it would be a much different narrative arc, because we would begin in the beginning, and then we would start to filter in Scott's story within that context. So my answer to that is, right now, as far as the reception is concerned, to that, no, I don't think that they're ready,
Okay,
Yeah.
But because we sort of like travel in the indigenous circles, they're ready there.
They're ready there.
Yeah, but not, you're saying,
Yeah.
in the wider.
Right.
Okay.
And Origins has been powerful within my community. That's the film they want. That's the film that they want to show at language classes, or they want to talk about with children, because that film hits them hard. Words from a Bear also brings out a lot of things. But again, it's a different aesthetic, and it's a different narrative strand, and it pulls away a little bit from what I think of myself as a filmmaker, and that's one of the things that I wanted to bring Origins, because I know Words from a Bear was really the film that we kind of were centering ourselves around, and it's an important film in my career, right? I mean, it opens doors for me, hopefully, to make a film like Origins that I can bring to a large audience. But at this point, what I had to do was I had to work and sort of subvert some of the things that I was placing in there. And there are messages, Kiowa messages within the film that are very apparent to Kiowa people, but it's not just laid out there, especially with linguistics, which would be like, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, it's important for us to think about our culture and to talk about our culture with our own language. The other thing about Origins, which is interesting too, is that the text is pretty dominating. So English text is in the film. For the longest time, we had Kiowa text on top and we had English on bottom, so that you were not dominated by English, because it just immerses everything and takes over. And the very first time I ever showed this Origins, it was actually on 2 screens. They were buffalo hides, and you could see through them. It was just the membrane of the skin. So it was really an installation, and there were no subtitles at all. And people came up to me after the film, and they said, you know, I didn't understand what was happening with the Kiowa portion of it, but I understood. Like, I got it. I felt it, and I could feel the rhythm of the language, and I understood that I was in a space that was really, really important. And that was enough for me to say, we can do this. We can tell these stories, and we don't have to always be regulated by this daunting subtitle text, or by the fact that we have to utilize English all the time in the things that we're doing. But one of the important things that I also have to say about that too, and just in terms of me personally, is that I'm of mixed heritage and I'm not fluent in Kiowa. And so having English in there and having my story in there is important too. And so that's a part of who I am. And so I can't disguise myself. I have to be open about that fact and that idea that it's okay for me to talk about my Kiowa experience through the language that I know best, which is English. And so, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting space to be in, I think, in trying to weigh those things. But you know, Words from a Bear is it's a complex film in that we really did try to do, I think, a lot of things to subvert some of the things that I think were really, really important to getting to the heart of Scott's Kiowa being. And I think that that's what's missing from the film, in my opinion. So when I watch Origins, I'm always touched by it, because I think, like, wow, this is how we really could have done this. Let's watch something here just from this. I want to pull up one of our stories that we did. Young, how am I doing?
You're good. Is your phone on your pocket?
Yeah, I think it's buzzing. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It sounds okay, but just a little bit.
Okay. All right.
Am I snoring?
Yeah. Oh. Okay. Oh no, now all hell's gonna break loose. Hold on. Okay.
There's always firewall here to trip you up.
Yeah. Let me see if I yeah, let me refresh it. Yeah, that's probably what it is. Dang, this thing always does this to me. Even in my class, you know, it pops over to Cornell Visitor.
If you forget it,
Uh-huh.
it shouldn't do that anymore.
All right, here we go. Okay. I think we got it. Let's bring it back here. Where are you? There we go. All right, let's see if we can get in here now. All right, there's Jill.
So I noted in Jill's credits that she listed herself as a filmmaker.
Yeah.
Has she ever done a film of her grandfather?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Her father.
Her father.
Yeah. Yeah. She did. It's called Return to Rainy Mountain, And it's more of an autobiography of her life and her experience with Scott growing up. Oh, I think I got it. Okay, here we go. Thanks, Avi. I feel like it's missing sound now.
Do you have the sound? Do you have a sound? Because this is the.
Yeah, it was playing. Yeah, it was playing.
Okay, it's the whole.
Yeah.
Maybe a little settings.
Let me see real quick here. It's possible that no.
The band outside is not part of the.
That's not part of the film.
What's going on in the courtyard outside? Is that just a little?
It's Ag Day.
Ag Day. Okay, all right.
They have a band for Ag Day? What?
And they have a little petting zoo out there and.
Okay, so it should be going. It should be. It's displayed.
The Ag School.
I was also wondering that too. Was it your kids, I guess? Give them something to do.
Young, any clue on this? Why there's no volume?
If you just come and try plugging in that aux to your input right here, it's already.
Do you have?
Yeah, it might work. Let's
But
see.
it's not. We don't even hear anything off your computer.
Yeah, it's not even coming out the computer.
Your computer's not moving.
Everything on the sound is right. I mean, because we just watched the other film. It shouldn't be changed like this.
I was having trouble getting the sound to work on this projector like last week.
But we're not even hearing it from the computer right now.
Let me go back and let's see again if let me just try another video here. It could be that it's just having trouble loading. Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't want to waste too much time on it. One of the things that we can watch it. I'll just let you guys look at the visuals here while I'm talking. One of the things that we tried to do here again is when we're talking about the visuals for anything that is an origin story or anything dealing with the world narrative, and we went back into the ancient, one of the things that I wanted to do or wanted to try to do was to figure out how to visually do that type of storytelling. This was new to me in some ways because I had new resources that I could reach out to. So when you do watch Origins, the first film that I showed you, everything is live action. But at that time I was playing with the idea of images that go inside of real live action video. So there were some animations that were happening within the piece. We finally were able to get animators, and this particular story of the Seven Sisters, which is the story of modern day Devil's Tower, Wyoming, which we call Tsoi, has a deep connection to Nska because it really is where he got his Kiowa name from. His name is Tsoi Tali, which is Rock Tree Boy. And he feels that he is the reincarnation of this boy who turns into a bear that's chasing his sisters. And the sisters become the stars of the Big Dipper. And then we have this image right here that goes into the live action of modern day Devil's Tower. But one of the things that that was important about telling that story is not only the deep connection to Nska Mamade's identity, but it also is an important origin story for Kiowa people because it links Kiowa people to the cosmos, their understanding of the cosmos and their understanding of these landforms and that connection between those two spaces. And so the Seven Sisters that jump on this tree stump, which if you look at it right now, doesn't that look like a tree stump? Because it looks like one to me. I don't know about you guys. It's a story, again, that is really, really important about a lot of different things in terms of ethics and morality, but also cosmology and location and place. But it individually has this incredible story connection to Nskapmamaday because of his name, T'oi Tali, which is Rock Tree Boy. And so that's why we present this particular story. And one of the ways that I wanted to show this and present it was through the use of animation, because I felt like if we are talking about magical realism, which a lot of times I feel like oral narratives, winter stories, or storytelling that happens is fantastic. Even though we believe these things truly happened and that they're real, there is a fantastic element to them. And so the way that I felt that I could get to those fantastic elements was to utilize animation as a form of representation to do it. But I always reconnect us to the space. So going back to the image of Devil's Tower was incredibly important to me. We also utilize animation. This is a story of Mankoi, which is our storm spirit. And let's see if we can get here. I don't know if it'll play or not, but we'll try it. We talk about this story because Scott gives us a testimonial about his life. He says that he paints in a certain way, in a certain depiction that is connected to his father. His father was an early Kiowa painter, and we talk about the Kiowa Five. These particular painters right here really kicked off, I think, art. And just to give you also some context, it's really the Kiowa Six instead of the Kiowa Five. Lois Smokey was a painter who was part of this group. And there's an interesting story with Lois. She essentially was pushed out of the program by the men in that program. And it's important to tell that story, I think, and depict it. The title that we are going by in this film is the Kiowa Five because that's how Scott explains it. And so I didn't want to be confusing in that sense, but it is important to note that it really should be called the Kiowa Six because Lois Smokey did a lot of great art in terms of Kiowa women and that representation and expression. So he links himself to these painters, and then we go into this story, this testimonial. So we go from the historical to this particular story about Mankoi, which is the storm spirit. And in this, again, we utilize the land space of Oklahoma and southwestern Oklahoma. We have these time-lapse images of storms, and we place the story into that context. So you see all of this imagery here. And now,
This is actual storm footage?
This is actual storm footage, yeah. Those are supercells, rotating supercells. This is the animation here of Mankoi, which how we believe tornadoes are formed. And I wish you could hear the story here because I would love for you guys to hear it.
Well, I'm struck by what Mamaday had to say here, and that he discussed how his mother and him went into a storm cellar, but his father would stay in the house and not go in because he felt that he could still talk to Ma To'i.
Yeah.
And that because they understood the same language.
Right.
But his mother, who was not Kiowa, right?
Yes, she's Cherokee Choctaw.
Right, that she had to go under,
Yes.
so she wasn't protected.
Right.
And it's interesting because I've been involved with this group called the Circle of Elders, and they talk about how, like, the devastating storms in the world right now, from an indigenous perspective, that land that's devastated is enacted upon this way because there's nobody there to talk to it anymore.
Right. That's true. And yeah, it's a great story in that sense, that again, language becomes really an important part to what this is about, what this particular story is about. His testimonial, this historical moment, I think, in history of talking about being a painter. And then we have the origin story that's in between, which is the ancient. And we try to link all of those things together again to create this cohesive idea of who his identity is and what being Kiowa is. But we do it in a way, again, that invites the audience in and pulls people into the story, which I think is what good storytelling is about. But again, we have to make concessions, because it would be lovely to hear what that Kiowa would sound like to that storm god, right? So I think it's an interesting moment in the film, and this again is also showing the aesthetic of linking the actual image of land with that particular origin story, and it's very, very important to do that. From my perspective, is for you to visually see the space and know where you're at and know where your location is in terms of place.
You know, in terms of communicating with the storm spirit, there were actual occurrences in Kiowa country where the storms were coming in. The old people would get out and talk to it. I remember my grandfather, anytime it got stormy like that, he would get out in the yard, in the backyard. We were living out in a rural area in Indian country, but he would speak to it. And it seems like the storm went around. You didn't actually see it, but in my child's mind, I imagine Mon Koi must have heard, you know, and understood what he was talking about. So it would go away. But the magical formulaic expression was gapping ba, go around. And as a child, you grow up, you hear that. And so it's embedded in your unconscious, you know, when you think about that. So,
but sometimes
very powerful that way.
Sometimes it doesn't work. And Dad was actually, and my mom, thank God that it didn't kill them, but an F2 tornado actually hit their house and destroyed their house. What was it, 5 years ago, something like that? 2013, yeah.
I can't remember, but Carolyn, my wife, we didn't have a cellar, we didn't have an underground shelter at the time, and so when it came on and we were caught, you know, before we could react by the news or the weather people, and we huddled down in the living room and pulled a mattress over us, and the storm hit. It was the most awful sound. It's terrifying, the sound of a storm, a tornado. If you've heard, you know about tornadoes. Some of you may have experienced it. But during that I must have blacked out for a moment there, because after it was over, it passed. It didn't happen very, very quickly, but it seemed an eternity because you're scared, right? My wife says, she said, you were talking in Kiowa to it. I don't remember. I said, thank God something happened, because it could have done a lot more damage, I think.
Yeah, I think it in fact skipped over the house and hit the park behind your house, right, and really destroyed the park.
Yeah, it took part of the roof and trees, and then it jumped and hit the park, and it just leveled the park. And after we saw that, it's a very sobering experience, you know. But again, you tie together these events in Indian life and storytelling and language, and you think, you know, there's a lot going on that we don't really, we have to come to grips with as human beings, that there are extraordinary things and fantastic things that happen. And so stories carry on, you know, that kind of occasion for memory and moment and all those kinds of things.
So that's I think a good jumping off point for any questions that we have, and yeah, I'll open it up. Anybody wants to ask? Yep.
Right now, this is more of a comment than a question, but I guess in what little of your work I've seen, I was at the movie yesterday, and then also the bit of Origins. A lot of it seems to be really heavy on like Kiowa men and not so much the women. And I guess I was just wondering about like I don't know, the role of women in Kiowa culture, because I guess I'm not super familiar with your culture in particular, and if that comes across in some of your other work, or...
Yeah, it's highly important. You know, because of our Pueblo connection, I imagine that at one time we were maternalistic, and our stories are maternalistic in a lot of ways. From my own, the thing about, for me as an artist and telling stories is I feel like the best way, I would rather a Kiowa woman make a film about that particular aspect and have that type of agency in telling that story than me telling their story for them. And there are Kiowa filmmakers that are women, and I think that's highly important. I want to leave those stories for them. But it is true. I mean, I am looking through that lens, I think, and that's one of the reasons why. It's not out of any way of saying that this is more dominant or that this is more important. It's really, I think, the lens that I'm looking through, and I do have respect for that in terms of being able to give that type of agency to a filmmaker or an artist. But a woman like Lois Smokey, just as an example, is important. Those stories are more untold because the Kiowa Five is there, and it is, and in Oklahoma history, you know, they're pretty prominent in many different areas. In the Capitol, they've done their murals in post office. There's stamps that are made. One of the Kiowa Five is in fact related to me, who's Stephen Mophope, and so, but that's important. That's important to tell that story. And the role that Kiowa women have played in my life and in my father's life has been huge. It's highly important. I was closer to my grandmother than I was my grandfather. My grandfather got all the accolades because he was the commander of the Black Leggings Society, which is a veteran society, and he had no time for me, very, very little time for me. And so my direct relationship to the old Kiowa ways was through my grandmother. And it was very similar for my father too. When we went down to visit, because we wanted to see grandma and talk to her. We didn't connect necessarily with our grandfather because of that sort of paternalistic society that he was kind of harboring. And I just felt more comfortable in that space with her. I want to see through that lens and I want to be able to tell that story, but again, it would be maybe presumptuous for me to say that I should be in charge of those stories or that I should tell those stories. I really feel like hopefully these Kiowa women filmmakers will have these stories that will come out and will be there because it is really, really important. But I would love to be a part of that and to tell the story, especially of my grandmother and that experience.
There are some wonderful stories about women because there's a certain period where Kiowa people, and essentially many Indian tribes are essentially matrilineal people. But that's why they have language, that's why they have so many cultural rituals, because women bear the responsibility of those rituals mainly. The men go out and put on the feathers just like the birds and show off, but the women actually give birth and they have a special place, and men stay away from that. They honor the miracle of birth, and it's a very powerful one. In the stories, if some woman could do that, which you're right about it, it should be a woman to tell that story and be the agency for that. It would be appropriate, and the tribe would be more receptive to that anyway, because that's not for men to tell, that's for the women to tell. But even in the tribal circle where we have 10 societies and all, They were all, there was even a women's, a children's group. They were not there for defense like the men were, to defend the people. They were there because they brought forth food, and they brought the birth aspect of it. It was very powerful, and there's a whole language associated with that. Even women have special names that we can't, the men are not allowed. So they said, men, we'll do this ourselves, and we do it better anyway. So, yeah, but you're right, that's some part of it. But if you look at the background of it, all of that, even Spider-Woman, when those 7 children went up into the heavens, and then we became associated with the heavenly creatures and all. And when there was a return back to earth, it was during the flood. And so the only living thing was a creature on the earth that could survive was a spider. And her name was, I'm trying to think of the name, it's a very long name, but she could float on top of the water. And so when the little boy came down, who was the son of the sun god, came down, she was there, and she taught him and showed him the proper way and split him up into 2. That's where the twin story comes in, twin boys. It's a very, very long, elaborate cycle, origin cycle. But Spider-Woman, and so they revere her. And so they say she initiated tribal life after they came from the skies. But even so, that's, that gives, it's very powerful. I love to hear, I don't know if any of you know Russell Means, who was a former leader of AIIS, talks about matrilineal. He said, we need a paradigm change in America. That's the problem with our country. It's all run by men. These are all European white men. So the old Indian way was that you go back to the women, and even in the, I think in the Iroquois Confederacy, the women had a very powerful role there. I don't know that story, but that may be part of that.
So do you think, Jeff, that to follow up on Sky's question or observation, that it was actually in Mama Day's focus that women weren't central?
No, I mean, we talk about Aho, his grandmother, as being an important person who taught him how to be a storyteller. And his mother obviously was influential in his life. The painting aspect of it was his father's influence, and it is a small portion of that. But I do want to make clear that that story of his mother in particular, but also of his grandmother, were central in a similar way that they were in my life, and important in telling that story. But the thing that's important, and what you're bringing up, and I think it is that we do need more stories in that space. One of I was thinking about making a film about T.C. Cannon, and I was thinking about making a film about Jesse Ed Davis. These are all Kiowa men, and I didn't realize that I was going down that trajectory. But there's so many other stories in there that need to be told. The question is should I be the one to tell that, or should a Kiowa woman have the agency to tell that story? Because she would know and understand, I think, from that perspective. So that's a very good question. Other questions? Yeah, sure.
Did you find any problems with translation, like from Kiowa into English?
Did I find what now?
Problems in translation.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I'm a native speaker for a bit, and there are some expressions I cannot translate.
Yeah.
I mean, the original story would lose its beauty.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is, one of the reasons why my father was so integral to this project was that, but also the other work that we do. He is the conduit to the language. So you can talk about that, just because right now he does translation from a lot of indigenous languages into English, and so that's been problematic, and he showed it yesterday in some of the things that he was talking about, how problematic it can be. But do you want to talk about that?
Sure, I'd be glad to talk about it. I have we probably don't have a lot of time, so maybe without using the screen, I think I'll just
go ahead.
talk about I talked about native or indigenous storytelling or narratives. I recently published a book with the University of Nebraska Press. It's called When Dream Bear Sings. We're obsessed with bears, right? When Dream Bear Sings, and it's native literatures of the Southern Plains. And what I took was I collected as many of the original tribal stories in Oklahoma. We have 39 federally recognized Indians tribes there. And from that southern part of the country, have them transcribed, and many of the tribes have writing systems, right? And so in our hurry to, revitalize language and keep it going, stories was one way that we could do that. So my plan was to collect the original stories, have them transcribed with a translation, and that's what the book is. Actually, I didn't bring a copy of that book with me, but it's at a bookstore, I think, here.
Yep.
In any case, that was the whole project. But the thing about it was that it was hard work. It took 4 years to compile that, and it was very difficult because you had to go to the tribe, and you had to locate people who were storytellers. People who were keepers and who could do the language. And so most of them were younger people. Many of them were trained in language work. And so they knew how to do field work. They knew how to go out and record and work with writing systems, to transcribe it and to have an introduction with a story. And the stories vary. There's myths, there's legends, there are all kinds of personal narratives. Origin stories are part of that, including the story of the seven sisters. Mine was one with the Daan Matong, which is the seven girls, the sister story in that book. But the whole idea, I think the heart of the project was to argue that native literature was viable as literature. It's the oldest known literature on this in this country, because before English, they were storytellers. They were telling stories. They were doing lots of things that the literary company and group academics didn't recognize or didn't even realize was there. So everybody, we have imported, even our literature is imported from Europe. It's not really, they call it American literature. It's actually English literature that's been honed down to American literature. But the point is that this literature has always been there, and it was spoken. It was an oral account of life and of events. And so we missed the whole opportunity of talking about American literature, because the canon is full of it. Emerson, Whitman, Dickinson, and all these famous 19th century romantic writers and poets. And so there's a whole missing link of literature there. And so our hopes was to have the general public realize that American literature, native literature, is truly American literature, and that was kind of the approach there. And it was exciting because before I studied linguistics and linguistic anthropology, my background was in English literature and American literature. And so even during that early time, I was always saying that there was a missing link. There was something missing there. And so hopefully this is a way to do that. Not only that, but it encourages tribal members, young people particularly, because that's the future. They're the ones who are going to carry on the language, if there's any language or literature at all. And theirs is going to be through the spoken word, and if they transcribe it and translate it, fine. But there's a whole work. And indigenous or native peoples in this country, we have a lot of work cut out for us, and you all have all these layers of responsibility. And you take care of literature, you take care of language, you take care of history. We find ourselves just inundated with responsibilities, and so you have to find some area where you're more well-versed or trained at least. so that you can articulate those concerns and so you can express them in an understandable way, so listeners, viewers, and students can take a hold and learn more about it. That much of what we do is just finding basic understanding among people, you know, and it's obviously through language and literature. How do we speak to each other? Why we talk? We all have stories, don't we? We all tell stories. I recently, and for a long time, I published poetry, which is English, and I finally decided that I should switch to Kiowa. So now I write Kiowa poems, and I translate them in English, and they're kind of bizarre. If they're my relatives who understand Kiowa would think that was rather strange to say, we don't do poetry, we do Kiowa. What are you doing all this stuff? But it opens up I think a useful area for young people, particularly who want to work in language and who want to express themselves and who want some freedom about it, you know, don't want to be confined down to the old tribal stories and tell them over and over. You want to mix in some fiction and poetry. It makes language more exciting. The possibility of language, the potential of language to grow and expand is always there. And we try to encourage that and say, yeah, use language and make mistakes, you know, make a lot of mistakes. Because language can't go on if you quit speaking it, if you quit taking chances. Kiowa was a very active spoken language among our people until right after the World War II in the 1940s, because when the soldiers returned to their families and they were encouraged to work and leave the Indian communities to find work, they started to engage English more. And so the native, the language spoken around the home was at a low level, and so it wasn't encouraged. The schools insisted that young Indian youngsters speak English and forget about their native language, and so it was discouraged. And so the use of Kiowa went down. The coining of new words, or borrowing of languages to extend language just changed. You know, I'll give you an example of how crucial that is. Simple words, for example, we don't have a word for computers in Kiowa, we don't have a word for a lot of modern things, but you can make up words, you can express the same technology by means of description, by using descriptive language. And so the native linguists, Kiowa linguists that I learned the writing system from, and incidentally he invented it, was Parker McKenzie, you know, he was Jeff knew him. It was just a wizard of a native linguist that he knew all about it. He could talk about it elaborately. Went to the 8th grade, but he knew it. He just had an innate ability to work with Kiowa and understand it and explain the various areas and phonology and morphology. He didn't use those words, but he knew where things fit in the language. He knew the structure, elaborate features and underlying features which make language what it is. One time he always had a chalkboard, a large chalkboard at the tribal center where I worked, and I was younger then. And he'd walk in and he'd write with chalk, and he'd say, you know, we don't even have a word for chalk. He said, I think I'll make a word for chalk. And he said, do you think the Kiowas will take it? I said, yeah. I said, if you go ahead and make it up. I said, they don't use chalk too much, the older ones, but the young ones will. They'll pick it up. So he took various parts, like any language, you know, you can do wonders with language, right? So we had a word for tail. A tail is that white, powdery clay that, you know, you find on the bank of river. It's very white, and they clean buckskin with it, you know, they clean and use it, Indians use it for paint. He took tail, because chalk is white. He said, let's see, what else can we do? Tail. We had a word for stick or wood, ada, and good means to write, so good ada meant pencil or anything to write with, a wooden stick to write with, or to incise words with. And then he prefixed the tail parts, the tail, good, ada. You have the chalk or the clay, good to write, and I was here a mix of a verb, maybe a noun, you know. various descriptive terms, and you have a word, teokurado. And it fits and it works, and it's a beautiful sounding word, teokurado. I love to say it. But he wrote it up on the chalkboard and stood back and looked at it. And some of the Kiowa elders, the old traditional Kiowas that we have a look at it and say, that doesn't make any sense at all, and then walk away from it. But to this day, the youngsters are using, they say teokurada, and now they got a word made up for computers and stuff. So the language is trying to pick up and grow. But since 1940 or so, they just quit coining new words and using the language actively. And so that happens to speech communities where people get to the point where they rely too much on English, because English is a murder of all languages, isn't it? It's all over the world. And I'm kind of tired of it, and it just makes it so boring and narrow. Because it's so general, everybody does it and do the same thing. There's no diversity or no interest in words or expressions, so they encourage that diversity of language use and to continue to use it. And that's essentially what I did. I did that for me. I'm a professor emeritus, and I've been away from the academic scene for a while, but I'm writing it and doing that sort of thing and working on films with Jeff when I can. So, but those are the kind of things that, but you mentioned us starting the Native language program at the university. I think it was one of the first in the country. I think in Arizona they were doing Diné, which is Navajo, teaching Navajo there, and now Hopi. But in Oklahoma we have a unique situation in that there are many tribes. There are 39 federally recognized tribes, of whom some of them contributed to this book I published on literature. But in that unique situation at the university, we decided in 1992 to start, I didn't start it, but the department, the anthropology department and the linguistics department kind of got together and said, why don't we offer courses in languages? So we've got the obvious 5 so-called civilized tribes. There's a Cherokee, Creek, Seminole, Creek Seminoles together, Choctaw and Chickasaw languages. They have orthographies or writing systems, and they also have some grammars, and they have some dictionaries. And so they obviously have a good head start because they've already kind of standardized their writing system and had some instruction in language. And so they set up those courses there, and they needed some other tribal participation. And so they called on the Comanche linguist and a speaker. And then they called Kiowa, Laura Watkins, who's a Kiowa linguist in Colorado. And she said, well, I think my friend Gus lives in Norman, why don't you come? So they called me. She knew I was a speaker. And like an idiot, I said, oh yeah, I can do it. He said, sure, I can speak. I didn't realize how hard it was. You go into a classroom and you don't have any dictionaries, you have no grammar, you have nothing but chalk, like the teokurado, and a chalkboard. And so I started just very humbly, and many languages start that way. And the first night I met with a class, there were 36 enrolled students. I said, wow, that's good. I walked in there and I looked around and all of them were my relatives. Everybody from back home wanted to say, what is this crazy Kiowa doing up there? We know him, he grew up, he's a little kid, he doesn't know anything about Kiowa, so they came to be my critics and to hear me out. But after about 30 minutes, I won their heart over. I had a lot of coffee, of course. They were older people, I knew they liked coffee. I said, have some coffee. Cold soy at home. Cold soy, cold pina, Bob was talking, and they loved it. And so we just started right off talking about coffee and drinking it. And I think the whole evening that transpired with discussion of coffee, drinking coffee, and telling little stories. And it grew out of that. And I didn't pay too much, to the linguistic side. I was trained in part, didn't know enough about it, but I thought I knew. And so it was conversation, and we held with that for a long time. And then after a while, we decided we needed to offer a beginning course, maybe intermediate course, and a more advanced course. And that's when we had to utilize more of not only conversation, but some of the grammar. And it became very exciting there because we found out that Kiowa was truly, like all languages, had some structure. There was something about it. You could actually figure it out, that how it came together and how it worked. And that was the whole magical aspect of that. And we found out we had, 86 pronominals? Oh my gosh. Pronominals in English, I don't know how many pronouns we have, but they call them pronominals because they move around and they change. And Kiowa's tonal, and we have nasals. You learn all those things as you work with it. So while I was teaching it, I was learning the whole structure of Kiowa, and that became very powerful. And after some years passed, after 10 years or so, then you thought, I think I know all about it, but you don't know all about it because there's so many other things there. You never learn enough, I guess, but that's the thing that's important. So I'm really excited that you're offering a language here in your native language program here, or you're bringing it in.
Well, there already was Sarah Murray is here, and what language does Sarah focus on? Cheyenne.
Oh,
so
okay.
We have a Cheyenne scholar.
Algonquin is in
and
Cheyenne language.
Yeah, and so, and in the past, there has been Mohawk that's offered here. What's different is we're doing the Cayuga language. And it's the first time that, this is their territory, and this is the first time.
How do you say it? Cayuga?
Cayuga, right.
Good.
And so, yeah.
That's good. And
there was also, I think, a Nawa was offered here for many years, correct? And, or was it Nawa, or no, was that the Incan?
Quechua?
Quechua was offered here for many years.
Okay.
And, and it's a shame. They felt that it wasn't viable because there's so many Quechua speaking people in the world. And that this wasn't going to be the center for it, and so that's why they.
Yeah, there's always some, there's some territorial disputes and all. There were always those kinds of things, and so we have any number of Muskogean people who are considered speakers and language people, and sometimes there's a little bit of rivalry between the groups because there'll be a community group, and then there'll be a university group, and they say, well, we know what's going on here, you guys don't know what's going on here. It's hard to bring them together. There's some
We just had that discussion this morning in our Cayuga language class where the faith keeper, Steve Hanhock, who he makes the point that he feels that in years to come that it's going to be this kind of formal Cayuga that will be spoken that's basically university taught.
Yes.
And he makes the distinction that he can really hear the difference between speakers that come up in the language or it's their first language.
In
and
some cases
people
that may be dialects, the same language with a little, because where I come from, we have our Kiowa is kind of like in that Carnegie area where we're from. And then there's a Hobart dialect, slightly different. Instead of, we say a golf for bread, and they say a ball. There's some little, you can still, what they're talking about, you understand. But it's always that we say it better than they do, I say it this way, how come you say, that little stuff. But you have to get over that. And I think that the future is promising because the young people don't have that problem. It's the older ones that have problems. Because they're purists, they want to keep it. And they don't even want you to write it.
Well, I think that demonstrates the kind of how robust I think your language is, even in this climate, And in the Haudenosaunee communities, I think that it's probably the Mohawk language that has these kinds of troubles, or because there are different dialects. There's Eastern, there's Western style Mohawk, and they debate over these kinds of questions. But for the rest of us, I think we're in a really different state.
Oh yeah. Even the stories, like the origin stories, I was telling Jeff, I said I have the way I heard the story. Sometimes the characters change, like they'll be all sisters or all brothers. They'll change it depending on how sexist you are. You say, well, there's boys in there. Leave the girls, they don't shoot a bow and arrow. They don't know how. I can kill a buffalo. Can a girl do it? Yeah, they can do it better. Stuff like that, you know. But and like stories, like language, like everything, you always have these different things happening.
Yeah.
It's stimulating and exciting if people don't get mad and start throwing rocks and beating each other up.
You know, I don't know why I didn't immediately think about this, that so much of your film and the discussion would be anchored in language. You know, because I read Mama Day in English. And I'm sorry that the sound isn't working, because just his voice and his presence, I think, are the, you know, the other character in this.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, you know, for Mama Day, it's the word that is everything, you know, and he talks about the word and words. He has a particular interest in words, whether they're English or Kiowa or Navajo, Dene. That's really the essence of who we are. And so he just has a different reverence in terms of language and his understanding of it and his use of it. But he's a master orator and is one of the best speakers. We have James Earl Jones in the film, and they're like, you know, do you guys know James Earl Jones? Darth Vader? Yeah, they're like, you know, we wanted to do a story between them because James Earl Jones does a story that's called the Bear God Dialogues, and they did it once together. And I think that James Earl Jones played the bear and N. Scott Momaday played God, but they both have the voice of God apparently. And so there was a debate on who did what. And
that sound clip, Jeff?
I mean, we have James Earl Jones doing that story. He did it with his son. We couldn't get both of them together, but I was thinking there would be a way that I could edit those two things together, of them going back and forth, of really the most prominent speakers, like in terms of their voice and things like that, of our time. So, but yeah, other questions? Okay.
Okay, well, thank you. For
Thank you.
Students that are in the class, if you want to hang back just for a moment, we'll just have.
Okay, yeah, absolutely.
Bye.